I never thought my pregnancy would turn into a nightmare. Brian and I have been trying to have a baby for years. It was a journey filled with heartbreak, negative tests, endless doctor visits, the quiet pain of watching other people's families grow while ours stayed the same. When we finally saw that second pink line, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I remember standing in the bathroom, gripping the test so tightly my knuckles turned white. Brian was in the kitchen, completely unaware that our entire world had just changed. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow. And then, without thinking, I called out his name. "What's wrong?" His footsteps were fast, urgent. I turned to him, tears in my eyes, and held up the test. We did it. For a second, he just stared. Then his face broke into something between a laugh and a sob, and he wrapped his arms around me, lifting me off the ground. That moment, it was perfect. I wish I could have bottled it up and kept it forever. Because I had no idea what was coming. Brian's sister, Laura, was the kind of person who had to be the center of everything. If something wasn't about her, she'd find a way to make it about her. When she found out I was pregnant, her excitement seemed genuine. "Oh my God. Finally. I'm gonna be an aunt," she squealed, pulling me into a hug that lasted a little too long. At first, I thought her enthusiasm was sweet. A little overwhelming, but still nice. I had always wanted our child to have family who loved them. I should have known it was more than that. It started small. "So, have you guys thought about names yet?" she asked one night over dinner. "I've got some amazing ideas." I laughed, setting down my fork. "We've tossed a few around, but nothing's set in stone." Laura's face lit up. "Oh, what about Jason? Or Jackson? Or you? Jonah?" Brian and I exchanged a glance. Something about those names, they all sounded too familiar. Laura leaned in, resting her chin on her hand. "I just think it would be so meaningful if you named him after someone special, you know?" It clicked. Jack. Her ex-husband. The one she cheated on. With his brother. The one who moved away, cut all ties, and never looked back. I forced a smile, feeling the discomfort creep in. We're really looking for something new. Something that's just for him. For a second, Laura's expression flickered, just a hint of something unreadable. Then she plastered on a smile. "Of course. Totally understand. But, you know, it would mean a lot to the family." I let the conversation drop. But over the next few weeks, she wouldn't let it go. I saw the cutest onesie that said Baby J on it. Jack always loved the name Joel. Wouldn't that be sweet? It would just really honor our family's history. Honor her history, she meant. One night, after yet another unsolicited name suggestion, I turned to Brian the moment we were alone. "This is getting weird, right?" He sighed, rubbing his face. "Yeah, I was hoping she'd drop it. She won't." He was quiet for a moment. Then, finally, "I'll talk to her." I don't know what he said to her, but for a while, things seemed normal again. I let myself believe that was the end of it. I should have known better. A few weeks later, I had a minor pregnancy complication. Nothing serious, but my doctor prescribed medication to help. Brian was at work, and when Laura called to check in, I casually mentioned that I needed to pick it up. "Oh, I can grab it for you," she offered immediately. "I'm already running errands." I hesitated. "Are you sure? I don't want to bother you." "Please, it's no problem. I'd love to help." I was exhausted. My feet were swollen, my back ached, and the thought of skipping an extra trip sounded amazing. So, against my better judgment, I said, "Okay. Thanks." When she dropped off the bag later that day, I thanked her and didn't think twice about it. The next morning, I woke up feeling wrong. At first, I thought it was just pregnancy nausea. But as the hours passed, it got worse. Dizzy spells. Blurred vision. A tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. Brian came home, took one look at me, and didn't even hesitate. "We're going to the ER." At the hospital, the doctors ran tests, asked me questions. And then, "The medication you took," the doctor said carefully. "It wasn't the dosage prescribed to you." My stomach dropped. Brian straightened beside me. "What do you mean?" The doctor sighed. "It was much stronger. Too strong for pregnancy." He gave me a pointed look. "Are you sure the pharmacy gave you the right prescription?" The pharmacy. Laura picked it up. A slow, sick feeling crept over me. I barely heard the rest of what he said. Brian squeezed my hand, his grip grounding me, but my mind was already spinning. Laura wouldn't. Would she? When we got home, I sat on the couch, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. Brian paced in front of me, his jaw clenched. "She wouldn't," he muttered. "I mean, she's crazy, but she wouldn't actually." I hit call. Laura picked up on the first ring, her voice light and casual. Hey, how are you feeling? I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay calm. What did you do? Silence. Then, a breathy little laugh. Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. My hands shook. Did you change my medication? A pause. Then a sigh. Fine. I just helped a little. The world tilted. You were struggling, and I thought, well, since you won't listen to me about the name, maybe you'll finally understand that actions have consequences. She laughed. I didn't think you'd actually end up in the hospital. That part's on you. I don't remember much of what happened next. Just Brian grabbing the phone, yelling, his face red with rage, and me, sitting there, staring blankly ahead, realizing one horrifying truth. Laura wasn't just pushy, she was dangerous. I sat on the couch, my hands gripping the edge of my sleeves so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. My mind was still trying to catch up, trying to process the fact that Laura had admitted to tampering with my medication. Not just admitted, she had laughed about it. Brian was pacing in front of me, his breathing uneven, his phone still clutched in his hand. He looked like he wanted to throw it against the wall. She's insane, he muttered. Absolutely fucking insane. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Brian. He stopped pacing and turned to me, his eyes dark with fury. We have to go to the police, I said. My voice sounded distant, like it wasn't even mine. Brian let out a sharp breath and nodded. Yeah, we do. But even as I said the words, doubt crept in. Because this wasn't something people just did. It felt too big, too impossible. Maybe she was just being careless. Maybe she thought she was helping, in her own twisted way. And yet, I pressed a shaking hand to my stomach. If I hadn't gone to the ER in time, if I had just brushed it off as a bad pregnancy symptom, would I even still be pregnant right now? That thought alone was enough to drown out any lingering hesitation. Brian grabbed his keys, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the tension running through his whole body. Let's go. The police station was quieter than I expected. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional sound of a phone ringing in the background. I sat stiffly in the chair, staring at my hands while Brian spoke to the officer at the front desk. When they called us back to make a statement, I felt like I was walking through a fog. The detective was an older man, maybe mid-50s, with sharp eyes that made me feel like he could see right through me. He listened carefully as I explained everything. Laura picking up the prescription, me getting sick, her admitting what she had done. By the time I finished, my voice felt raw. The detective leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. So, let me get this straight, he said. Your sister-in-law knowingly gave you a stronger dosage of medication while you were pregnant, and when confronted, she admitted she did it on purpose. Yes. And she gave you a reason? Brian scoffed. Because we wouldn't name our baby after her ex-husband. The detective's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't look surprised. He nodded, scribbling something down in his notebook. That's felony tampering. Possibly reckless endangerment, depending on the severity of the dosage. At the very least, it's a serious offense. A lump formed in my throat. Hearing it put so plainly made it feel real. So what happens now? Brian asked, his leg bouncing under the table. We'll start by bringing her in for questioning, the detective said. See if she repeats the same admission to us. If she does, she'll be formally charged. Either way, I'd strongly advise getting a restraining order. I let out a shaky breath and nodded. Okay. Brian reached over, taking my hand in his. His grip was firm, steady. We'll do whatever it takes. I thought that would be the hardest part. I was wrong. Because the moment Laura found out we had gone to the police, she lost it. My phone lit up with messages, one after another. Laura, you're seriously pressing charges? Over a misunderstanding? Laura, I was helping you. Laura, you are ruining my life. Then, when I didn't respond. Laura, you're not even part of this family. You don't get to do this to me. I turned off my phone. Brian's wasn't any better. His mom, Susan, had called him 5 times before he finally answered. The moment he said hello, I could hear her voice, sharp, angry, even from across the room. What the hell is going on? She snapped. Brian pinched the bridge of his nose. Mom, I'm not doing this right now. You're pressing charges against your sister? She drugged my pregnant wife. His voice was cold, his patience thin. She didn't drug her, Brian. She made a mistake. Brian let out a bitter laugh. A mistake? A mistake is grabbing the wrong brand of cereal. A mistake is forgetting to text someone back. She intentionally changed Kate's medication, knowing it could hurt her. She wasn't thinking, Susan insisted. She didn't mean any harm. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked over and grabbed the phone from Brian's hand. Susan, I said, my voice trembling, if Brian hadn't taken me to the hospital, I could have lost this baby. Silence. Then, quieter, I don't think she would ever want that. She didn't care enough to think about it. I shot back. And now you expect us to just pretend it didn't happen? To just let it go? Another pause. Then, stiffly, family doesn't turn on each other like this. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening on the phone. She turned on me the moment she decided my child belonged to her. Susan didn't respond. So I hung up. I turned to Brian, my heart pounding. She's never going to be on our side. He looked tired. Defeated. I know. And that was when it really sank in. We weren't just cutting off Laura. We were losing all of them. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Laura's voice in my head. You're ruining my life. You're not even part of this family. But by the next morning, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going to be scared of her anymore. She had already taken too much from me. I wouldn't let her take anything else. The next few days felt like a slow-motion car crash, something awful happening in real time, but I couldn't stop it. Laura wasn't just furious. She was unraveling. At first, it was the texts and calls, but when we didn't respond, she switched tactics. Suddenly, Brian's extended family started reaching out, some pretending to be neutral, others outright accusing us of ruining Laura's life. His cousin Rachel sent me a long message. I don't know the full story, but maybe this is getting out of hand? Laura's really upset. She's saying you're making this bigger than it is. Then his Uncle Greg. So you're really pressing charges? Against family? You should have just talked to her. And then, of course, Susan called again. I just don't understand why you're doing this, she sighed when Brian finally answered. Brian rubbed his face. Because she's dangerous, Mom. She needs to face the consequences of what she did. She just made a mistake, Susan said, her voice tight. You really think she deserves to be locked up over this? Brian scoffed. Yeah, actually, I do. What if Kate had lost the baby? Would you still be defending her? That shut her up for a moment. But then, softer, almost pleading, she said, I just don't want this to tear our family apart. Brian let out a bitter laugh. It already has. He hung up before she could say anything else. After that, the silence from his family was deafening. It hurt. I won't lie. Even though I knew they were enabling Laura, even though I knew their priorities were twisted, some small part of me still wanted them to pick us, to see how wrong she was. But they didn't. And maybe they never would. Then, just as I thought things couldn't get worse, Laura escalated. Brian came home from work one evening, his face tight, his grip on his phone so firm his knuckles turned white. She went to my office. I felt my stomach drop. What? She showed up, he said, tossing his phone onto the counter. Told my boss she was worried about me, that I'd been acting erratic, keeping secrets, and that she was just trying to help. I stared at him, my chest tightening. Brian, she's trying to ruin you. I know, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Luckily, my boss knows me and didn't take her seriously. But Kate, she's desperate. And desperate people do stupid shit. I swallowed hard. She wasn't going to stop. She wasn't capable of stopping. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise outside made my heart pound. I knew she wouldn't break in, she wasn't that unhinged, but the fact that I even had to consider it made my skin crawl. Then, just after midnight, my phone buzzed. Not a call. A notification from our security camera. I sat up so fast I nearly woke Brian. My hand shook as I opened the app, my breath catching in my throat. There she was, standing in our driveway. Laura, just standing there. Not knocking. Not trying to get in. Just watching the house. I felt sick. My fingers fumbled to shake Brian awake. He grumbled at first, then tensed the second he saw my face. What's wrong? I shoved my phone into his hands. Look. His expression darkened. He sat up, eyes locked on the screen, watching the grainy, black and white footage of his sister standing outside like something out of a horror movie. Then, after a long minute, Laura did something that made my blood turn to ice. She lifted her hand and pressed it gently, almost affectionately, against the hood of Brian's car. Then she stepped back, smiled slightly, and walked away. Brian cursed under his breath and jumped out of bed. That's it. We're calling the cops. And we did. But by the time the officers arrived, she was gone. One of them, a younger guy with sharp eyes, checked the footage again, frowning. She didn't try to enter the house. No, Brian said tightly. But she has a restraining order. This has to count as a violation. The officer sighed. It's creepy as hell, I won't lie. But legally, if she wasn't trespassing and didn't make contact, it's hard to push for anything beyond a warning. Brian ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. So she can just stand outside our house in the middle of the night, and there's nothing we can do? We'll talk to her, the officer promised. And we'll file this as part of her case. But for now, keep your cameras on, and if she does anything, call us immediately. When they left, I sat on the couch, still gripping my phone, my whole body tense. Brian sat beside me and let out a shaky breath. I don't get it, he said. I don't get what the hell she wants anymore. I stared at the footage again, watching the way Laura's hand lingered on his car. And suddenly, I did get it. It wasn't about us. It was about him. The baby. She wasn't done. Not even close. The fear settled deep in my bones. For days after Laura showed up outside our house, I couldn't shake the image of her standing in the dark, pressing her hand to Brian's car like she was claiming something. It made my skin crawl. Brian tried to act like everything was under control, but I could see it in his face, the tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed anxiously against the table, how he double-checked the locks before bed. We both knew this wasn't over. And we were right. It happened on a quiet afternoon. Brian was at work. I was home, resting, trying to force myself to relax, even though I hadn't felt truly safe in weeks. Then, a knock at the door. I froze. No one was supposed to come over. No deliveries. No visitors. I grabbed my phone and checked the security app. Laura. My stomach dropped. She was standing there, shifting on her feet, looking calmer than she had any right to be. Like this was normal. Like she hadn't been stalking us for weeks. She knocked again, lighter this time. Kate. My breath caught. She knew I was home. I forced myself to take a deep breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. She wasn't inside. The door was locked. She couldn't get to me. But that didn't stop the sheer, primal panic clawing at my chest. Then, her voice turned softer, almost sweet. I just want to talk. I stayed silent. A pause. Then, I know you're scared. My fingers clenched around my phone. Call the cops. Call the cops. But I didn't. Not yet. Because then she said something that sent ice through my veins. I just want to see him. Not me. Not Brian. Him. My unborn son. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I backed away from the door, my whole body trembling. Laura knocked again, a little harder this time. I get why you're upset. I do. But you have to understand. This was never supposed to be your baby. A wave of nausea rolled through me. She kept talking, her voice eerily steady. He was meant to be mine. I didn't think. I just moved. I stumbled back into the bedroom, locking the door behind me with shaking hands. My breaths came fast, uneven. I pressed my back against the wall, my free hand gripping my stomach. I needed to call Brian. Now. I dialed, my fingers barely working. He picked up on the second ring. Hey babe, what's? She's here. My voice came out in a whisper, but the terror behind it was unmistakable. Silence. Then, sharply, where? At the front door. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to steady myself. She keeps saying she wants to see him. I heard the sound of movement, Brian grabbing his keys, his breathing quick and uneven. I'm coming. Call the cops. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and switched calls. The dispatcher answered immediately. 911. What's your emergency? My sister-in-law is outside my house, I said, my voice shaking. She's not supposed to be here. There's a restraining order. Is she attempting to enter the house? Not yet, I admitted, my grip tightening around my phone. But she's talking about my baby. Like she thinks he's hers. The dispatcher's tone shifted instantly, more urgent. Stay where you are. Officers are on their way. I stayed on the line, barely hearing what she was saying. My heart was pounding too hard. Then another knock. Harder this time. I flinched. Kate. Laura's voice was different now. More frustrated. I don't know why you're making this so difficult. I squeezed my eyes shut. You don't deserve him. A fresh wave of terror crashed over me. Then sirens. A flash of red and blue lights through the window. Laura must have seen them too, because suddenly, everything went silent. A beat. Then footsteps. I let out a shaky breath as I heard voices outside, officers calling out, telling her to stop. A few seconds later, a sharp clink of handcuffs. Then, finally, blessedly silence. It was over. Or at least, I thought it was. Brian got home before the cops even finished processing Laura. He burst through the front door, eyes wild, chest heaving like he'd run every red light to get here. The second he saw me standing in the hallway, still shaking, still gripping my stomach like I could physically shield our baby from her insanity, he crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled me into his arms. "Are you okay?" His voice was rough, like he was barely holding himself together. I nodded against his chest, but the truth was, I wasn't sure. I wanted to be okay. I wanted this to be over. But I could still hear her voice. He was meant to be mine. Brian pulled back just enough to cup my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears I didn't even realize had fallen. "She's gone," he whispered. "She's gone." I wanted to believe that. I really did. The next few hours were a blur. The cops stayed for a while, taking statements, reassuring us that Laura had been arrested for violating the restraining order. That this time, she wouldn't be able to talk her way out of it. "This is serious," one of the officers told us. "With the previous charges, plus today's incident, there's a good chance she won't be walking free anytime soon." I should have felt relief. Instead, all I felt was exhausted. Brian didn't let go of me the rest of the night. Even when I told him I was okay, that I just needed sleep, he stayed close. He double-checked the locks, made sure the security system was armed, then finally crawled into bed beside me. His arms wrapped around me, warm and solid, anchoring me to reality. "It's over," he murmured against my hair. I wanted to say it back, but I couldn't, because the truth was, I didn't know if it was over. ####. 2 weeks passed. Laura didn't get out this time. She was officially facing multiple charges, violation of a restraining order, harassment, attempted coercion. Her lawyer pushed for a mental health evaluation, and from what we heard, she was being transferred to a psychiatric facility while awaiting trial. That should have made me feel safe. And in some ways, it did. But I still flinched every time the doorbell rang. I still checked the locks twice before going to bed. I still woke up in a cold sweat some nights, convinced I'd heard her voice outside the window. Brian never said anything about it. He just pulled me close, kissed my temple, and let me find my way back to sleep. Then, one morning, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. But when I saw the name on the screen, something in my chest tightened. "Susan." I hesitated, then picked up. "Hello." Silence. Then a heavy sigh. "Kate." I didn't say anything. Another pause. Then, quietly, I wanted to say I'm sorry. I blinked. I hadn't been expecting that. "For not believing you," she continued. "For defending Laura. For making you feel like you were the problem when all you were trying to do was protect your family." I swallowed hard. "What changed?" Susan sighed again, this time more shaky. "I saw her." My stomach twisted. "At the jail?" "Yes." A pause. Then, softer, "She's not the person I thought she was. Or maybe she is, and I just didn't want to see it." I closed my eyes. "Yeah, I know that feeling." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, cautiously, "I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope, someday, we can fix things." I thought about that. I thought about all the times she had made me feel crazy. All the times she had defended Laura, even when the truth was staring her in the face. But I also thought about how, in the end, she had chosen to see it. And that had to count for something. "I don't know," I admitted. "But maybe." Susan exhaled like she had been holding her breath. "That's fair." We hung up, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something loosen in my chest. Maybe we could move on from this. Not now, but someday. ####. Noah was born 3 months later. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when I went into labor. Long, exhausting. But when they placed him in my arms for the first time, everything else faded away. He was perfect. Brian kissed my forehead, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. "Yeah." And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Laura. Not the past. Just him. Just us. Brian and I never spoke to Laura again. She ended up taking a plea deal. A year of mandatory psychiatric treatment. No contact with us or Noah. She didn't fight it. Didn't even try. It was like she had finally accepted that whatever fantasy she had built in her mind, whatever twisted reality where Noah was supposed to be hers, was over. And as for us, we moved. Not far, just enough to start fresh. We painted Noah's nursery a soft shade of blue, filled his bookshelves with stories about adventure and kindness, surrounded him with love and safety and warmth. And every night, when I rocked him to sleep, I would press a kiss to his forehead and whisper, "You're safe. You're ours. And no one would ever take that from us."